Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Vice Admiral retired Sean Buck, the new president of the National Training and Simulation Association. I'm going to be the moderator today for our fireside chat with our special guest, Admiral Chris Grady, who's the current vice chairman of our Joint Chiefs of Staff up in Washington, D.C. Sir, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We're really honored to have you here. You definitely add gravitas to this and a perspective about the Joint Force that we're all clamoring to hear. So ladies and gentlemen, if I can just kind of review just the last 36 hours, we have had the opportunity to hear from 5 members of Congress yesterday who are on the Congressional Modeling and Simulation Caucus. We've heard from the very most senior leadership of the Navy and the Marine Corps, who are the naval services are the host and the lead service for this year's ITSIC. We have heard from other senior leaders from all of the services, as well as one of our newest NATO ally partners, Sweden. We've heard from an industry leader who gave some very good remarks on AI and his perspective from both having served in the Navy as well as many years in industry. And now Admiral Grady is going to start the afternoon off with kind of capturing and wrapping up all the remarks we've heard so far and apply it not only to an individual service, but integrating all of the joint forces together with the same goal in mind, our national defense. After this fireside chat, we'll be able to wrap up the day enjoying also a Navy flag officer panel and an Army flag officer panel. So before you leave the convention center today, you should have had a wonderful opportunity hearing the perspectives of the most senior leadership of industry as well as the military. Let me take just a moment and properly introduce Admiral Grady so that you all know his background. He's a native of Newport, Rhode Island, and a graduate of the University of Notre Dame. He's the 12th Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In this capacity, he's a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and is the nation's second highest ranking military officer. In past assignments, he commanded the USS Ardent, the USS Chief, the USS Cole, Destroyer Squadron 22, Carrier Strike Group 1 embarked on USS Carl Vinson, Naval Surface Forces Atlantic, and the United States Navy's 6th Fleet, and concurrently Naval Striking and Support Forces NATO. He most recently served as the commander of the United States Fleet Forces Command based in Norfolk, Virginia, where he was responsible for providing combat-ready forces forward to numbered fleet commanders and combatant commanders around the globe in support of our nation's national interests, and concurrently served as the Commander, Naval Forces Northern Command, Commander, Naval Forces Strategic Command, and the Strategic Command Joint Force Maritime Component Commander and Commander Task Force Atlantic. There's a lot of hats, sir.
Yeah.
Admiral Grady is the Navy's old salt, recognizing his extensive knowledge and expertise as a professional mariner and as the longest-serving active-duty surface warfare officer in the United States Navy. Welcome back to Orlando, sir.
Thank you.
I know you've been to ITSIC before.
I have.
And you definitely appreciate its importance, and we're glad to have you as part of the 58th venue of ITSIC.
Well, Sean, thanks for having me. Thanks for your leadership and for the whole team here. This will be my 3rd time addressing ITSIC, twice as Fleet Forces Command and once now here as the Vice Chairman. And that should speak to you about how important I think the work that you all do collectively, how important it is, not just to the Navy, but to the Joint Force writ large, and to how we integrate with our allies and partners. And so I am just delighted to be back, and I congratulate you on your new job. We miss you in the flag wardroom, but you've certainly landed well, and that's for the betterment of the nation.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations, Sean.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me review the ROE today for the dialogue that we're going to have. I believe you had on your seat or near your seat a white question card. There's some of my colleagues in the audience who have them. If you'd like to write a question for Admiral Grady for us to try to include in the discussion, these first 15 minutes, why don't you take the time to pen that in as best handwriting as you possibly can, because yours truly is going to try to read your question. And we'll try to incorporate those into the dialogue so that Admiral Grady can get a very good real-time sense of what's on your mind. and how he may tell you how the industry-government relationship can be even better. So if you will, the first 15 minutes, write your question. There's one gentleman with the cards right now, but I'll prime the pump starting off with my own set of questions that I developed for our discussion, if I may.
Please.
So I suspect many people in the audience do not fully understand or appreciate your exact role as the vice chairman. Can you share with us what are the roles and responsibilities of the vice chairman?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do it. And it might, I think, once we kind of talk about it a little bit, it might help preset some of the questions for you. It might lead you to some things that you want to talk about. So the vice chairmanship is a unique position, I think, in the Defense Department and in the building. And the way I intellectualized it is I find that I live in four worlds. So the first is policy, right? So I am a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I spent a lot of time at the White House. I was a member of the Deputies Committee. I often represent the chairman on the Principals Committee. Think about what happens in the tank with my fellow Joint Chiefs and the combatant commander. So a lot of time in policy. If you jump over to the next world is requirements. I am confirmed by the Senate to be the chairman of the Joint Requirements Oversight Council. And so that's me with the 4-star vice chiefs of the services, where we establish big R requirements that will help us bring the joint warfighting concept to life. Go down from that to the budget piece, and I'm a co-chair of the Deputies Management Action Group, the DMAG, where we take all of the inputs and we put the budget together across the FIDIP. And then the last world that I live in is in acquisition. So I'm a member of the Defense Acquisition Board as well, where we look at the major defense acquisition programs as they hit, we hope they hit their milestones, and we take a look at cost, schedule, and performance as they move forward. So policy, requirements, budgeting, and acquisition, lots going on there. So how does one attack that, right? So I have my own strategic framework here. And it has 3 end states. And the first is joint force overmatch now and in the future. This is really important. So let's unpack that just a little bit. First, everything is a joint fight. We know that. And so how we come together as a joint force is critical. Every domain is joint now, with the possible exception of the undersea. The Navy will continue to own that, but everything is a joint fight. And we certainly don't want to have a fair fight, so we want to achieve that overmatch. And what I find happens too often is the adversary thinks this way, and we do this, and they do that, and we do this. And what we really need to be doing is the adversary does this, and we do that, right, where we try to achieve overmatch. And then the now and in the future piece is really important, and that's the current readiness versus future readiness. It's the central military problem of the national military strategy, which is strategic discipline. How do we continue to deter but yet modernize the force into the future? It's solving Deputy Secretary Hicks's 3 FIDIP problem, the FIDIP that we're in now, the one that's out there in the future, and how we bridge that gap. So that's one end state. The second end state is dominant decision advantage. Now you start to see where you might discreetly fit in. I will be honest with you, when I came up from Fleet Forces, I thought that might be one of those key tenets that my strategic framework might fit on. I will build everything I do on top of a dominant decision advantage, and we don't have that, and we do need that. So probably a good point to say I'm the first vice chairman for whom it's a 4-year job. I don't have to get confirmed halfway through, and I'm also not allowed to be the chairman. So this is my last job. That gives me some independence, but that 4-year independent look at things allows me to attack tough problems like dominant decision advantage. So think, how do we bring AI to the fight? How do we do modeling and simulation, which we should talk about later today, clearly? How do we think about combined joint all-domain command and control? And then the last one is warriors that can fight and win, and I think that makes sense. 4 lines of effort to get to those 3 end states. The first, provide best military advice, member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, absolutely critical. Second is to drive force design and force development. And for the team here, I would say if you look at force design, force development, force generation, force employment, we're really good at force employment. That's the art and science of command, where the COCOMs do their work downrange. Force generation, I think the services do a really good job of spinning up and certifying the heavy metal to go forward. Force development, again, the services do a pretty good job with the money that we finally give them to man, train, and equip. But it's the force design piece, and back to that future look, that's where we need to do better. Can we do better looking into the future to drive where we need to be in 2040, let's say, and to live up to the time scales that are codified in the joint warfighting concept. So that's the second line of effort. The third is to data enable the force and the foundry. So let me pull apart force and foundry for you. I look at everything through two lenses. The first is the force side. When I was just a Navy guy, it was the fleet and the foundry, and now it's the force and the foundry as the vice chairman, and that's going out and fighting and winning. That's the kinetic part, if you will. That's going out and fighting and winning. And then the foundry is everything that man trained and equipped to enable that. And I find that the more senior you get, the more you have to think in both spaces. And I have to be able to data enable that, getting to that dominant decision advantage. I think we do a relatively good job on enabling the fight. From a data perspective, lots of work to be done there if we're going to take Boyd's OODA loop and turn faster than the enemy, particularly in this hypersonic world we live in. But we also have to be able to do it on the foundry. So when I go to Congress with an $870 billion budget, or when the secretary does, he should be able to say, okay, what'd you do with all the rest of it? And here's the data that says why we need that. And then the last is to foster a culture of excellence. I think this gets to the people piece, and it's how do we train individuals? How do we train composites? It's recruiting, it's retention, it's crushing destructive behaviors, it's encouraging signature behaviors. I sit on the Deputies Workforce Council where we talk about those things at least monthly in a pretty important venue. And then finally, to wrap it up, three core tenets across those lines of effort to get to those end states. The first is support the chairman. Clearly, I'm the vice chairman. I have my own view as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but I try to help him shape his agenda and then to carry it out on behalf of the secretary and the president. I think that makes sense. The other two kind of work together. One is everything has to be done with our allies and partners. That's for sure. When you read the NDS, the National Defense Strategy, that's a key tenet of that. And I see many of our allies and partners here. But then the third, again, across all those lines of effort to get to those three end states, is you have to be able to integrate in three axes. So let's say the x-axis is across all domains. So seabed to space and cyber in between. We want to be able to integrate across all domains. And then the y-axis is across all echelons. So I operate up at Ech 1, Ech 0 in the Pentagon, but never forgetting that it's about the soldier, the sailor, the airman, the Marine, the Guardian, the Coast Guardsman down there at Ech 4, Ech 5. And then finally, back to allies and partners, it's the z-axis, right? And you are part of that, because I find the more senior you get, the more you have to expand your understanding of what an ally and a partner is. So certainly it's the 7 treaty allies that we have around the world and others in uniform around the world, but expanding that to partnerships that include the media or Congress, as you correctly pointed out before, or academia. Many of you are represented here in the room today, and certainly the defense industrial base. And again, I applaud all the work that you do. We have to be able to integrate with them. And so I'll finish on that, because that's what today is all about, right? And what ITSEC is all about over the several days that you're going to do it. What was happening here today allows us to advance that integration in that z-axis, which is so absolutely important.
And when you began your comments in the description, those top four, the policy, the acquisition, the budgeting,
The requirements.
and the requirements, that every one of those categories affects the defense industrial base.
Absolutely.
So, and you're doing that on behalf of everybody, not just parochial to your mother service of the Navy.
Absolutely not.
At the time. Very good. Thank you for that explanation.
Sure.
It was really helpful. How has modeling and simulation helped with the roles and responsibilities that you described? I heard you use the word decision-making. You and I have talked on the phone a couple times in lead up to this, and you're very, very much interested in getting modeling and simulation to help the decision maker, even to the role of possibly creating budgeting. So would you mind addressing some of that?
So as I answer this question, I would ask you to consider those four worlds. So again, policy, requirements, budgeting, and acquisition. And if we, I think, can all agree that every decision we make should be threat-informed, risk-based, and data-enabled, then you can see where you fit in there. So modeling and simulation can help us perhaps define policy maybe, but it'll certainly help us optimize policy, whether it's at the strategic, operational, or tactical point of view. And certainly in execution, it can help us model and sim what are the right ways and the right places to go and be predictive and help us with policy execution or strategic or operational and tactical execution. For me on the JROC, I want to be able to bring that data-enabled decision-making that the JROC undergoes to the table and put it next to what CAPE does. So CAPE is a very important analytical engine in the department. I would say that they're the big dogs in the room when we sit at the table at the DMAG. And my goal then is to bring modeling and simulation to the fore to back up the decisions that we make, again, data-enabled decisions that we make at the JROC, and put that on the table next to what CAPE comes up with. CAPE adds a very important element, which is affordability. I just do the requirement. So I want to be able to have data-enabled, not just strongly held opinion, but facts that I can put on the table next to CAPE, and then the secretary and the deputy secretary can make that risk-based discussion about, I got it, but we're going to go in this direction because of other things. And so that's my goal with the JROC. Certainly in the DMAG, we want to bring both together. And then on the acquisition side, it's absolutely critical. We have to be able to measure and assess where we are. We want to do that with data. And the interesting thing at the DAB, at the Defense Acquisition Board, is often we're like, well, what about if we did a little of this and a little less of that? What do we get? Again, we want to get past strongly held opinion and turn those dials and pull the lever and come out with an answer. And I think modeling and sim helps us with that.
And have you seen the big dog in that room, CAPE? Mm-hmm. Have you seen them already incorporate modeling, simulation, AI into their analytical process, or are they still using old
They have a robust analytical engine, and to CAPE's credit, they have embarked on a 4 or 5 year plan built around a department-wide, to include the Joint Forces, a department-wide analytical agenda. And they have an analytic working group where we all sit down together and talk about what modeling and sim tools are we use, whether it's STORM or AvSim or whatever, to bring to the DMAG co-chairs, myself and the deputy, little this, little that, you get this. Little this, little that, you get this. And so courses of action are derived from the modeling and simulation that CAPE is able to do, with that key element added, which is affordability. Very, very important for the deputy.
So both advantaged equally in the whole discussion and going through all the what-if drills.
Right. My goal is to keep up with CAPE on the JROC.
Okay, very well. Yeah. Thank you. So what do you see as the top modeling and simulation challenge for the Joint Force? What we might be facing today, but trying very hard to look forward. What do you think the greatest challenges are to using more modeling and simulation and trusting it, and trusting what that type of machine-driven analytics might do for us?
Yeah, so I think there are several that animate my thinking. The first is there's so much data out there that you all are working with. It's how do we manage that data? And so if you think about the data and measure it by quality and safety and security, but then just the sheer quantity of it, how do we manage data so that we can bring it into these very sophisticated modeling and simulation engines that are going to help us with that dominant decision management? I would say that's the first one. But from a joint perspective, I think we need to have standards, right? So that as we build out, for instance, the joint live, virtual, and constructive framework, I want the services and the COCOMs to be able to plug into that seamlessly. So standardization will be really, really important. We're not there yet, and we're working on it. And indeed, we're working with Congress to fund a little bit more money to allow us to build out these robust standards so that everybody can see where they fit in. And in fact, the JROC is working right now, and will report out in March of this year, a capstone ICD or capabilities document that will lay out what these standards should be. And again, the JROC will sign this out in March. And I think from a big R perspective, that will be really helpful. So data and how you manage it, standards. We have to get to cross-domain solutions. So I want everything to be fully informed. And that's very, very challenging. So the more that we can get away from swivel chairing data, the more that we can have cross-domain solutions from the highest classification levels all the way down, the better we'll be. I also think we have some holes in our swing from a domain perspective. So back to that x-axis that we talked about. And the areas that I'm focused on now are can we move beyond the physical domains to space and to cyber and to the EM spectrum into, say, irregular warfare? We have to be able to simulate those. They get a little bit harder. Irregular warfare, as an example, or in the information environment, that starts to get into the cognitive domain, and that's an area that we need to, that I think we need to expand in. So expanding into all domains will be absolutely critical. I think if we can get those right, you get some attributes that will be really important. The first is that we might be able to go at scale and at speed faster, particularly if we design a system that is mobile and is cloud-based and leverages AI. So we want to be able to scale it quickly, and we want to be able to go very, very quickly. I think the second thing is, whatever we build into the future has to be easy to use, right? Because I think that's what will generate the iterative cycle that we really want. If it takes weeks and weeks and weeks to set up the next run, and then you run it and you go, okay, let's try this, and another weeks and weeks and weeks, that's not helpful. It's useful, but it's not where we need to be, so we need to go faster. So ease of use will be really important. And in the end, all of those things together, I think, have to feed collaboration. So back to integrating in the Z-axis. Can our allies and partners see themselves in that, right? Because we're not going to do anything without them. And so we have to move along with them. So I think if we can solve the standards, the all-domain solutions, the cross-domain solutions, if we can be mobile, if we can build in scale and speed, if we can build the ease into it, then that collaboration with a fast turn, I think we'll achieve that.
Very well. Prior to this, as we talked about your biography, you commanded fleet forces down in Norfolk, Virginia, where you were focused on force generation. Training, certifying individuals and units to be employed by combatant commanders as part of a joint force.
Right.
How important is live, virtual, constructive to force generation? And in addition to that, does LVC address our biggest training needs?
It absolutely does. So let's step back a second and conceptualize a little bit about what modeling and sim brings. So this is Chris Grady's way of thinking about it. If you were to draw a triangle, put modeling and sim in the middle of that, and then label the three vertices of the triangle, then at the top might be decision support. We've talked a little bit about this, right? At the second vertice, and we can talk about this later if you want, it might say digital twin and what that brings to the fight. Maybe we should dig in on that. And then finally, there's learning. That's the third element, I think, of that triangle that is modeling and sim. And so we can break learning down into both individual training and composite training. And this is where LVC, I think, really comes into the play. Let's start with composite training. The complexity of what we want to do, that is both driven by the things that we can do, but the quantities that we need, the capacity that we need to learn how to fight with, cannot be replicated on a repeatable basis with live forces. You just don't have enough opposition forces to do the fight. You don't have enough of your own assets to do it. And so the complexity and then the capacity piece argues for L with the V and the C piece. So you absolutely have to do that. And I think secondly is the security aspect. So if we're going to bring all of these things together, particularly at the highest end, back to that cross-domain solution piece that I talked about, you have to be able to train all that under Sauron's eye. And you can do that in a live, virtual, and constructive environment where the enemy can't see or the adversary can't see what you're doing, and we can iterate fast. So at scale and at security, I think is the argument for the composite level of live, virtual, and constructive training. Now let's take it to the individual, and that's what I'm really going to be interested in when I walk the watch floor on the individual training. And both times when I was here before, It was to see how live, virtual, and constructive, but more importantly, modeling and sim can be brought to individual training, which is so critical, to get parochial for a moment, to the Navy's transition to ready, relevant learning. And so let's talk about that for a little bit. Ready, relevant learning says, look at our 19th century way of teaching a sailor, and I will extend that to soldier, sailor, airman, marine, or guardian, or Coast Guardsman, in which 95% of the training that is provided is done in a brick and mortar schoolhouse, standing behind a podium, and then you regurgitate the test back with me. That's a 19th century model. And there's a better way to do it. And I am fascinated by understanding the science of learning, and then how you can bring the hybrid model that's built on that science of learning to include, yeah, sure, some element of somebody standing behind the podium, but then how does augmented reality and the visual and the ability to use Stave or some system like that to start to get the sailor or the soldier immersed in the environment that they're working with. And then maybe you move on to haptics, where you take the learning that you've had in the simulated and augmented reality environment to haptics, and so that by the time you arrive at your command, it takes you maybe 2 or 3 watches to qualify and to certify. That's where we need to go, and it has to be built on the science of learning. So I'm very excited about things like how you bring gaming and game theory in. It's not computer, it's not SWAS in a box for my friends here. It's not that. It's not computer-based training that did not work. It is, and oh, by the way, it is how our sailors learn now. It's how our Marines learn now. So I'm equally fascinated in that element of that vertice of the L part of the triangle on the individual side.
Can we unpack that other vertice? Can we go to digital twin?
Sure.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that, one of the promises of modeling and sim, so back to the triangle, modeling and sim in the middle, decision support at the top, learning at one, and then the digital twin piece, I think that's absolutely critical. Let me give you a quick vignette that's in the news right now. So ships are fighting their way through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Heavy clutter environment, to the extent we can discuss this here. Their ability to send back to the laboratory and go, here's what we're seeing, help us set up. So they can take the data that the ship has, run it on their lab somewhere else, and within less than 24 hours, send back so that the crew can fight better. That's what I'm talking about in digital twin. Another way to look at a digital twin, particularly from a cost savings perspective or an arms control perspective, is what we do in the nuclear world. I'm a co-chair of the Nuclear Weapons Council, and as you know, we don't test nuclear weapons live. Mm-hmm. But our national labs do, and they do it in a virtual environment because they have super high fidelity digital twins that allow them to do that. So, expand that into hypersonics or any of these other very complex and expensive warfighting areas. The more that we can build a digital twin, we're better. I'll give you the final piece of this. So if you think about another triangle, which is digital, and, at the top of that triangle, you might have a DevOps environment, right? And then at the other part of that, you'll have digital engineering and digital manufacturing. And then at the other, you'll have open architecture. That's my digital triangle, right? The more that we can do digital design and digital manufacturing, the faster and better that we will be. So when I go to industry, and if they're building more reliable and the rest, and then allows us also to iterate on it as we learn across the production floor. So when I go to industry, one of the questions I ask always is, describe for me your digital journey. And if I don't hear the words digital twin, I get a little nervous, right? On how are you doing that? How are you taking the digital design, transferring it to digital manufacturing, which we know will keep us on cost, schedule, and performance.
Very good, thank you. We do have some responses from the audience. I'm gonna turn to y'all's questions. It says, what is your perspective on how our acquisition process and timelines currently align with our requirements as they relate to rapid technological advances, both our own and our adversaries.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about this at lunch
We do.
today.
At every fora like this, we talk about this. I'm sure Secretary Norquist, you did too, when you sat down. The kernel of the question is we're not going fast enough, and that's true. So should it take 8 or 9 years to bring a system from R&D into the hands of the warfighter? No, it should not. And so this clearly is one of the things that we are working on all the time. And so as I look out on the audience here, and particularly to our small business friends who have a great idea and they want to find someone who can catch it and turn it into a program, get across the proverbial valley of death, our time cycles aren't matched up. Our cycle takes way longer than the perhaps 2, maybe 3-year cycle that many of you are in. We get it. We certainly understand that. And things have been undertaken to try to improve that and to try to sync up those 2 cycles, if you will. One is the adaptive acquisition strategy that we have that allows things like middle tier acquisition that's built on a 2-year cycle, or the software acquisition program that allows you to also go on a 2-year cycle. So we're moving out on areas like that. There are other ways to think about it. You could think about the deputies replicator initiative. That's an initiative to go faster. You can think about how we might leverage Raider funds to jumpstart and to assist small business and others as they come up with their good ideas. One that needs a little work, I think, and Bill LaPlante and his team are working on that, is how do we train our acquisition professionals? So down at Fort Belvoir at the Defense Acquisition University, they are pros from Dover when they come out, but we teach them to de-risk everything. Yeah. And so Bill LaPlante and his team are looking at, this is the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, he's looking at how, well, maybe we need to change that calculus a little bit, right? Now there's oversight, and I get that, and so if you go back to the requirements piece or what's within the JCID's manual, that can be slow too. We're trying to speed that process up, but it isn't. And requirements is a relatively small piece of that. There's the rest of it that goes into it. But what can we do to go faster within that as well? But oversight, I think, is a big part of it. So, in 1956, speaking of oversight, the Army budget for procurement was $0. And the reason for that was they had a lot of surplus. They were coming out of the Korean War, and they had the ability at the time to reprogram that money, not 1 year but 7 years, and they were able to shift that money over. So they didn't ask for a big chunk of money in their procurement dollar. We don't have that now, right? It's all 1 year, maybe it's 2-year money, particularly in most of the procurement programs. That's an example. Now that oversight was put on us because we probably screwed it up. And so we have to earn that trust back from Congress to perhaps give us some more flexibility in maybe it's not 2-year or maybe it's 3-year money. And we have earned some of that. So if you think about multi-year procurement, we have earned that trust back, and we have to keep that trust. So it's on us to be good partners with Congress in that. They put the oversight on for good reasons. We have to earn the trust back to say, here's why this is important. I think budget flexibility is one way that we might be able to get after that. Because in the end, what that allows is allows us to move money and reprogram it over 2 or 3 years. So now we have that really good idea where there's a certain kind of money. We can shift that money over. Now we have a program to catch it. We've got to earn that trust back.
If I take you back to the DAU comment that you made about how we train our acquisition professionals, if we continue to use AI more and be able to iterate the what ifs and teach them risk management and to determine instead of zero risk, to learn how to articulate how risk will be okay, they can then take that conversation to the oversight and win and process through the oversight level and get things turned quicker with
Absolutely. A decision. I mean, that should be part of how we empower our program managers coming out of a world-class institution like Belvoir. We have to empower them, though. We have to, say, here are the tools to do it. AI could be one of them, or modeling and sim more appropriately, I think, could be one of those. And then we have to take the reins off on risk. It's not their fault. It's ours. Yeah. We have to be the ones that say, well, let's take a little risk here.
Yes, sir. So our second question from the audience, how do you see autonomous systems becoming integrated into joint operations? And I would assume from this question, fully autonomous systems.
Well, let's make sure that's where, let's assume that is, because I think when we look at Ukraine as an example, with the ubiquity of uncrewed, particularly aerial systems, we could talk about what's happening in the Black Sea, but the ubiquity of uncrewed aerial systems in Ukraine, you know, some say, well, there's your autonomy paired with uncrewed systems. Not quite yet, right? So that's more first-person view, or maybe one, perhaps two per soldier. We want to get to 15 per soldier, right? Yeah. That's where we're going to want to go. So we're going to have to ramp up the autonomy that will allow us to do that. And that is the wave of the future. So you can listen to Secretary Kendall of the Air Force talk about CCAs or loyal wingmen, or however you want to phrase that. Or you could look at Replicator and putting attritable autonomous systems at scale, working together in a particular environment to win that fight. So autonomy, particularly when paired with uncrewed systems, is going to be, I think, a defining characteristic of the future kind of changing character of warfare. Yes, we absolutely have to get there. And
do you see that as a near future or still a distant future?
Well, you know, I think it's nearer than we think. So if you look at the innovation engine that is the Ukrainian people, they're coming. They're getting there very quickly. We can do the same thing. Now, the department has said, you know, AI, which will lead to, I think, true autonomy, has to be done responsibly. So back to the AI triangle, right, which, another triangle. So you have data in one corner, you have things like compute and storage in another vertice, and then at the top you have what happens in the box, you know, the algorithms. We have to understand what's happening in there. So that's, you know, that's the kind of the tenet of responsible AI. So slow in the fast direction.
In that regard, then, at that top vertices,
yeah.
That you could, are you a proponent of the need for regulation or governance of the use of AI?
I'm a proponent of moving at the speed that the technology allows us, as long as we can control it. And I think there's great promise there. And I think this is the tenet of responsible AI that the department has espoused.
Very well.
Yeah.
Okay, sir, I think we've got time for probably one or two more.
Sure.
This question says, when you were at Fleet Forces, you championed the Ready Relevant Learning Program, and you were bringing acquisition and training closer together. Can you talk about the importance of that acquisition and having a hard and training relationship?
Sure. So for those who don't know, Ready Relevant Learning is the Navy's answer to that 19th century training model. A lot of that work is done here, down at NOC TSD and then at other places. So many trips down here to see how that process was going. Importantly, it's owned by the Navy's type commanders. So the SWO boss, the air boss, the submarine, the underlord, if you will, they own it. And they help define what the requirements are and how we learn. And it's a continuum. So apprentice, journeyman, supervisor, master, building out those curricula that leverage the right training at the right time and in the right method. That's what Ready Relevant Learning is. And so acquisition and we want to do it fast. So back to the speed piece, right? And so the work that I think Admiral Caudle is still doing down at Fleet Forces to continue to advance this with the Vice Chief's help and the CNO's help has to make the training and the acquisition work together. You have to jam it together, right? And so hence the role of the program manager, why NOC TSD is important in the work that they do. You just need to have the right professionals in the right room to build that program to go at speed. And as you know, the end state then is this continuum across all the Navy ratings. And we don't have time to wait, right? That train has left the station. We're not gonna build any more brick and mortar schoolhouses. We have to get onto it. And it isn't just obsession training or apprentice training. We have to do all of it. So we have to go fast. And that's the imperative of jamming those two together.
Yes, sir. This is somewhat of a broad question. I don't know whether if we have time to drill down. It says, how do you see future integration of cyber and electronic warfare into fleet synthetic training or the LVC writ large environment?
Yeah, well, so as I told you earlier, I think there's a couple of holes in our swing that we're working, with your help, thankfully, that we're working really hard to close. And so we model and simulate the physical environment, but now we have to get after space, cyber, EW, and the information environment. That's work to be done. You know, if the chief space officer were sitting here right now, he needs a space range. If cyber commander were sitting right here, he needs a cyber range where we can go out and test these with high fidelity systems. Much harder to do than just say in the air domain. Right. And so the work that all of you are doing to help us advance our thinking in those less than physical domains is really important. And as I mentioned earlier, I am particularly fascinated in the cognitive domain. So how do you emulate adversary thinking? Right, and this is where AI can be really, really helpful, right? Because I think the quote is that advanced AI can read every book ever written in 2 hours or something. So if we can read what the adversary is saying and then emulate their thinking at a high fidelity level, that's a game changer. So to the question on, I think it was cyber and EW. We definitely need to get after that so that we can put that into the space, into the modeling and simulation space. And why is that? Because I think far too often we will build a plan or run a war game, and then we'll run the war game and then go, oh, wait a minute, let's sprinkle some EW on top.
And white card it.
And white card it, right? And that just cannot happen. We have to be in the habit of organically baking in space and cyber and EW. I'm fixated on 5 things in addition to all that I told you. I want to get the JROC right. I want to get strategic information right. But the other 3 that I'm really interested in are precision navigation and timing and alternates therein, and EW. So if you look at what's happening in Ukraine then, or what could happen in Taiwan, how do we fight in an EW saturated environment? And how do we impose an EW saturated environment? And that leads me to my 5th thing that I'm very focused on, and that's modeling and sim. So how do I bring that along with space into our planning and our practicing and our rehearsing that is high fidelity and we can learn from it?
I think you're the key guy. I'm going to build upon that last comment and your passion there. You're the key guy that will really help this audience with this question. Can you tell us, we want to be able to walk away from here hearing it from you. Can you tell us about where the Joint Force needs to be in the future of modeling and simulation? With your responses, I think the audience in the defense industrial base can walk away knowing what their focus should be in the near future to help us out.
Let me give you a little vignette. On the Joint Staff J8, there's a team there that does modeling and sim, and they are really, really good. They're on par with CAPE and others. They're fantastic. And every year, they come to the chairman and I, and we kind of decide what projects they're going to work on. And they give us those 6 or 7 projects, and we learn so much from that, and we fold it into our procurement, we fold it into further experimentation, we fold it into further wargaming, into O-plan planning, and all of that. It's spectacular work. And every time I get one of those briefs, I just say, okay, I want more, right? And so for the team here, how do I scale that? So the task for the team on the Joint Staff is, I want to triple our ability to do that. Now that's expensive. It's expensive for the facilities that we need. It's expensive for the people, the experts that know how to do that, and the systems themselves are expensive. And so if I'm going to triple capacity, and maybe even Susanna Blue, who's the director of CAPE, wants to triple capacity to bring more to that, but I bet all the labs want to do that as well. We're going to triple that. We've got to get the cost scale down, and we've got to get the ease of doing it down. So back to some of those attributes we talked about before. I want to be able to do it at scale, I want to be able to do it at speed, and I want it to be fast, so I can iterate and go, wait a minute, try this, now try this, now try this. Okay, that's the answer that I think we need.
And not break the bank doing it.
And not break the bank, break the bank doing it. And that's where I want to get. And if you can push that if you can push that to the edge for me so that it's mobile and that company commander downrange can run his own little simulation about what's going on, we're really onto something at that point. So
close.
Cost, scale, speed, ease of doing it, and push it out to the edge so we can do it out there.
Here. So, sir, I kind of surveyed as best I could this audience right now, the men and women in uniform. I kind of picked out some of the Army officers. I picked out some of the Navy officers. You all leveled the playing field. Notre Dame has had their way with Navy. Notre Dame has had their way with Army. So let's put that aside for now.
Okay.
We both have bowed down and capitulated.
All is right with the world.
Do you have a prediction for the Army-Navy game 2024?
It will certainly be competitive.
Always a diplomat.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving Admiral Grady a round of applause. That was a win-win-win for all the triad, for industry, for government, for academia, all of us here working together for our national defense. Admiral Grady's going to be able to spend some time down on the exhibit floor. So if you're down there going back with some of the exhibitors, if you see him, you'll be able to maybe ask a few more questions. Thank you for your participation. It was good. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, well done. Thanks, Sean. Thank you.